The arrogant new foreman fired me right on the sun-baked roof of our biggest client's mansion, screaming that solar panel guys were unskilled laborers. I walked away without a word, taking my tools and my master certification with me. He didn't realize that without my name on the company license, every single wire he touched was illegal. So I sat back and watched his $1 million grid tie completely fail inspection. Before this story continues, tell me where you're watching from today and what's the temperature. Drop it in the comments. You won't believe how this arrogant boss destroyed his own career in a matter of hours. At 1:15 p.m. on a blistering Tuesday afternoon, the Arizona sun was behaving like a magnifying glass focused directly on my neck. The temperature was pushing 104 degrees, but up on the roof of Jerry Miller's 10,000 square foot estate, the black asphalt shingles radiated the heat back up, making it feel closer to 120. The air smelled of melting roofing tar and hot aluminum. My shirt was completely soaked through, clinging to my back like a second skin, but I kept my breathing steady. I was in my late 50s, and I had learned decades ago how to pace myself in the brutal furnace of a midsummer solar installation. "Alexander, we need 2 more rails on the south-facing pitch," Miguel Cortez called out. Miguel was 22, a hard-working junior installer on my crew who was eager to learn the right way to do things. He was balancing on the pitch, his safety harness secured properly to the roof anchor we had drilled into the trusses earlier that morning. "Coming up, Miguel," I replied, grabbing the heavy aluminum rails. We were meticulously measuring and setting the flashed L feet, the crucial mounts that hold the solar panels to the roof. You can't rush this part. If you miss the underlying rafters, the roof will leak the very first time it rains, and on a custom-built mansion like Jerry Miller's, a water leak meant tens of thousands of dollars in drywall and hardwood floor damage. We were taking our time, doing it perfectly. That was when I heard the crunch of gravel in the massive circular driveway below. I peered over the edge of the gutter and saw a spotless, lifted 2024 luxury pickup truck pull to a halt. The door swung open, and out stepped Trent Lawson. Trent was our new regional foreman. He was a guy who wore expensive Italian leather loafers to active construction sites and sported a wristwatch that probably cost more than my work truck. He'd been hired by the corporate office a month ago because he had a fancy business management degree and promised to cut labor costs by 20%. He had absolutely zero background in electrical engineering or hands-on installation. To Trent, we weren't craftsmen. We were just numbers on his weekly spreadsheet. "Smith!" Trent barked from the driveway, shielding his eyes from the blinding glare of the sun. "Why is this taking so long?" Corporate said this roof should have been fully racked by noon. "We're making sure we hit the dead center of the rafters, Trent," I called down, my voice calm but carrying over the hum of the neighborhood AC units. "This roof is non-standard spacing. We have to measure twice to ensure the wind load rating holds up." "I don't care about your excuses," Trent yelled, grabbing the bottom of our extension ladder and shaking it aggressively, a massive safety violation. "I'm coming up there. You guys are moving like molasses." A few minutes later, Trent crested the edge of the roof. He was wearing a crisp, pale blue polo shirt that was already showing patches of sweat, and his face was flushed with anger and the sudden elevation. He looked around at the pristine work Miguel and I had done, but his eyes only saw the empty space where panels hadn't been laid yet. "This is unacceptable," Trent sneered, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "It's just Lego blocks for adults, Smith. You screw the metal down, you slap the glass on top. Why are you treating this like it's a delicate surgery?" Miguel looked down at his boots, intimidated by the foreman's aggressive posture. I set down my impact driver. The heavy metal tool made a solid thud against the roof. "It's not Lego blocks, Trent," I said evenly, looking him dead in the eye. "It's a high-voltage direct current power plant that we are strapping to our residential home. If we pinch a wire under these rails, or if we don't ground the array properly, the entire roof could catch fire. I don't compromise on safety. Not for corporate, and not for you." Trent scoffed, crossing his arms and looking down his nose at me. The heat radiating between us was suddenly much worse than the afternoon sun. He didn't see an experienced master electrician standing in front of him. He just saw an older guy in dirty work pants who was standing in the way of his monthly productivity bonus. By 2:30 p.m., the tension on the roof was thick enough to cut with a utility knife. We had moved on to preparing the electrical conduit runs, the metal piping that would safely carry the massive electrical load from the solar panels down the side of the three-story house to the heavy-duty grid-tie inverter. I was meticulously bending a piece of rigid EMT metal conduit with a hand bender, ensuring the curve was perfectly flush against the stucco wall of the mansion. The National Electrical Code requires exact specifications for outdoor conduit, especially in climates where the sun degrades cheap materials in a matter of months. Trent had stayed on the roof, pacing back and forth, micromanaging our every move. He was heavily sweating now, his pale blue polo completely ruined, which only seemed to make him angrier. "Stop wasting time with the metal pipes," Trent suddenly commanded, pointing at my conduit bender. "Just use the flexible plastic tubing. It's cheaper, it bends around the corners instantly, and we can finish the wire run in 20 minutes. I stopped what I was doing and wiped the sweat from my brow with a faded cotton handkerchief. "We can't use standard flexible plastic here, Trent. The UV index out here will crack it in 2 years, leaving live copper wires exposed to the rain. Plus, the local county code strictly prohibits it for runs longer than 6 feet on commercial-grade residential ties. The inspector will flag it immediately." "I don't care about some overpaid county inspector," Trent exploded, stepping into my personal space. His face was a dark, dangerous shade of crimson. "I am the foreman. I make the decisions. You are dragging out the clock to inflate your hourly paycheck, Smith. I've had enough of you old-timers thinking you run the show just because you have gray hair." Miguel dropped a handful of zip ties, his eyes wide as he watched the confrontation unfold. I remained perfectly still. Over my 30 years in the trades, I had dealt with a dozen arrogant managers just like Trent. They all shared the same fatal flaw. They believed authority equated to knowledge. "I'm not doing it, Trent," I said quietly, my voice steady and unwavering. "I will not install an unsafe, non-compliant system. If you want to use the plastic tubing, you can install it yourself." Trent's eyes bulged. His jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. "You're refusing a direct order?" "I am refusing to break the law and endanger the client's property," I corrected him. "That's it," Trent screamed, his voice cracking with rage. He threw his hands up in the air. "You're done. You are fired, Smith. Pack up your tools right now and get off my roof." "Are you sure you want to do that, Trent?" I asked softly, giving him one final chance to step back from the edge of the cliff. "Do I look like I'm joking?" he sneered, pointing a trembling finger toward the ladder. "Panel guys are unskilled laborers anyway. Anyone can do this job. I can replace you with a temp crew of teenagers by tomorrow morning. Get your gear and get out." I didn't argue. I didn't yell back. I simply nodded. I walked over to my work area and began meticulously packing my Occidental leather tool belt. I wiped down my insulated screwdrivers and placed my heavy-duty Nipex wire cutters into their specific pouches. The routine of packing my tools was calming. "Mr. Smith," Miguel whispered as I walked past him, his voice laced with genuine panic. "What are we going to do?" "You keep your head down, Miguel," I told him quietly, handing him my insulated water jug. "Stay hydrated. Don't let him force you to do anything dangerous. I'll handle the rest." I slung my heavy tool bag over my shoulder and walked to the edge of the roof. I climbed down the aluminum ladder, step by step, leaving Trent Lawson standing victorious in the blistering heat. As I reached the ground, I didn't look back. He thought he had just fired a disposable laborer. He had no idea what he had actually just done. At 3:45 p.m., I pulled into the driveway of my modest, single-story home. The drive back had been surprisingly peaceful. The air conditioning in my old trusty Chevy Silverado had finally kicked in about halfway home, cooling the sweat on my face and giving me time to think. I walked through the front door, dropping my heavy tool bag in the entryway with a loud thud. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the pot roast my wife, Helen, was preparing in the slow cooker. Helen was sitting at the kitchen table, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she went through the week's mail. She was a sharp, fiercely intelligent woman who had been my rock through decades of unpredictable construction schedules. She looked up, surprised. "Alexander, what are you doing home so early? Did the inverter short out again?" I walked over to the kitchen sink, washing the grime and asphalt dust from my hands with heavy pumice soap. "No, The inverter is fine. Trent Lawson fired me. Helen dropped the envelope she was holding. She stood up immediately, her eyes flashing with instant indignation. He did what? That arrogant, slick-haired kid fired you? After all the overtime you've put in to save his disastrous schedules? He told me panel guys were unskilled laborers, I said, drying my hands on a towel. He wanted me to run the high-voltage lines through cheap plastic flex tubing to save time. When I told him it was illegal and unsafe, he lost his temper and told me to get off his roof. Helen crossed her arms, pacing the kitchen floor. Oh, I am going to call the corporate office right now. We'll see how unskilled you are when they have to refund Jerry Miller his deposit. I couldn't help but smile. I walked over to the kitchen table, pulled out one of the wooden chairs, and sat down. I opened my weathered leather briefcase and pulled out my laptop. Helen, don't call corporate, let Trent dig his own grave. She stopped pacing and looked at me, noticing the calm smile on my face. She knew that look. Alexander, what aren't you telling me? Trent was hired by the corporate executives 3 states away, I explained, booting up the computer. He's a spreadsheet guy. He only looks at labor costs and profit margins. I guarantee you he never bothered to read the company's local incorporation charter. Helen sat down next to me, watching my screen intently. What does the charter say? To legally operate a commercial-grade solar installation company in this state and to pull any electrical permits, the company must have a NABCP-certified master installer on staff, I explained. NABCEP stood for the North American Board of Certified Energy Practitioners. It was the highest standard of certification in the renewable energy sector, requiring thousands of hours of documented fieldwork and a grueling board exam. The company doesn't own that master certification, I continued, navigating to the State Electrical Licensing Board's official government portal. I do. My name and my personal license number are the only things legally anchoring this entire branch's right to do business. The corporate office knows this, which is why they pay me a premium. But Trent just thought I was an expensive, grumpy old man. I logged into the state portal. The screen displayed my credentials, linking my master license to Trent's company. There was a small red button at the bottom of the page that read, Sever Employer Bond. If I'm no longer an employee, I said softly, hovering my mouse over the red button, then they no longer have a master license. Ellen's eyes widened as the realization hit her. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. Which means every permit they pulled today is instantly void, I said, and any electrical work Trent does on that roof from this second forward is completely, legally void. He's building an illegal power plant on a millionaire's roof. I clicked the red button. A confirmation box popped up. I clicked confirm. In a fraction of a second, the digital bond was broken. I closed the laptop. Now, I said, leaning back in my chair and pulling out my cell phone, I just need to make a quick phone call to an old friend of ours. Does Mason Williams still drink dark roast coffee? At 4:15 p.m., the late afternoon sun was beginning to cast long golden shadows across our living room floor. Helen had brought me a steaming mug of dark roast coffee, placing it gently on the table next to my laptop. The rich, earthy aroma of the coffee mingled comfortably with the savory scent of the slow-cooked pot roast drifting from the kitchen. It was a domestic tranquility that stood in stark, almost amusing contrast to the professional explosion I had just set off. I picked up my cell phone, scrolled through my contacts, and tapped the name Mason Williams. Mason and I went back almost 15 years. Long before he was the chief county electrical inspector, a man who possessed the terrifying power to halt multi-million-dollar construction projects with a single red tag, he had been a nervous 20-year-old apprentice on my commercial crew. Back then, Mason was a kid struggling to balance night classes with grueling 50-hour work weeks. One particularly harsh winter, a shady site manager tried to pin a massive copper wire theft on him to cover his own tracks. I knew Mason's character. I spent 3 days digging through security logs and supply manifests until I proved the manager was the thief, saving Mason's career and keeping him out of jail. Mason had looked me in the eye the day I handed him his cleared journeyman card and told me he owed me a debt he could never fully repay. The phone rang exactly twice before a deep, resonant voice answered. Alexander Smith. To what do I owe the pleasure on a Tuesday afternoon? Don't tell me you found another code discrepancy in the new municipal handbook. "Hello, Mason," I said, leaning back in my wooden kitchen chair and taking a slow sip of my coffee. The ceramic was warm and grounding against my palm. "No handbook debates today. I'm calling with a much more interesting development. Do you still handle the final commercial grid tie inspections for the upscale residential districts, or do you farm those out to your deputies?" "I still handle the big ones personally," Mason replied, the tone of his voice shifting from casually friendly to professionally curious. "Especially the custom estates in the Platinum Ridge neighborhood. The liability on those $1 million solar arrays is too high to delegate to the new guys." "Why do you ask?" "Because you have an active permit open for a 10-kilowatt system on the new Jerry Miller estate over on Ridgeview Drive," I explained, keeping my voice perfectly even. "And as of 20 minutes ago, the company executing that permit no longer has a qualifying master electrician." There was a profound silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint click-clack of Mason typing rapidly on his office keyboard. "Hold on, Alexander. I'm pulling up the county database right now. Miller Estate, Sterling Solar. Wait a minute. Your name is the primary qualifier on this corporate charter. Did you resign?" "I was fired," I corrected him, glancing over at Helen, who was listening intently with a satisfied smirk on her face. "The new regional foreman, a man named Trent Lawson, decided that panel installers are just unskilled laborers. He ordered me to run non-UV rated plastic flexible conduit for the main high-voltage roof runs. When I refused to violate safety codes, he terminated me on the spot." "He fired the master license holder?" Mason asked, his voice dripping with absolute disbelief. "Does this spreadsheet cowboy even realize how the state contracting laws work? Without you, their entire commercial operating license is effectively suspended. Every wire they touch right now is a massive, unpermitted liability. I severed my employer bond on the state portal a half hour ago, Mason." I confirmed. "I wanted to give you a professional courtesy heads up. Trent is pushing the crew to finish the roof rack and the main electrical runs by tomorrow. He will inevitably call your office to schedule the final grid tie inspection before Friday to secure his precious productivity bonus." "I see," Mason said slowly. A sound of his typing stopped. "Well, Alexander, considering the extreme safety hazards associated with unlicensed contractors operating high-voltage equipment, I think it is absolutely imperative that the chief inspector handles this particular grid tie evaluation personally." "I thought you might feel that way," I smiled, taking another sip from my coffee. "I suspect Trent is going to try and cut every corner in the book to meet his corporate deadline. You might want to bring an extra pad of violation notices." "I'll bring the whole box," Mason promised, a low chuckle rumbling through the phone. "Enjoy your sudden vacation, Alexander. I have a feeling the rest of the week is going to be incredibly entertaining." By 8:70 a.m. on Wednesday morning, the desert air outside my window was still crisp and relatively cool, hovering around 70 degrees before the inevitable brutal climb into the triple digits. I sat at my solid mahogany desk in my home office, the morning sunlight filtering through the horizontal blinds, casting geometric stripes across my keyboard. Helen had already left for her morning errands, leaving the house completely silent except for the rhythmic, satisfying clatter of my typing. I was in the meticulous process of setting a legally inescapable trap. In the construction industry, spoken words evaporate the second they leave your mouth, especially in the sweltering heat of a roof. If you want to hold a reckless manager accountable, you need an ironclad paper trail. I opened my personal email client and began drafting a formal notification to the Corporate Human Resources Department of Sterling Solar, located 3 states away in a high-rise office building in Chicago. Subject: formal acknowledgement of immediate termination and severance of master qualifying license. I typed carefully, choosing each word with the precision of a surgeon handling a scalpel. I detailed the exact timeline of events from the previous afternoon. I noted the timestamp of 2:30 p.m., the specific location on Jerry Miller's roof, and the exact nature of the dispute regarding the non-compliant, unsafe flexible conduit. I stated without any emotional embellishment that Regional Foreman Trent Lawson had officially and aggressively terminated my employment for refusing to violate the National Electrical Code. Then I moved to the crucial, devastating paragraph. "Please be advised that pursuant to my sudden termination, I have officially severed my professional bond with Sterling Solar via the State Electrical Licensing Board portal, effective yesterday at 3:45 p.m. As I was the sole NABCP certified master installer anchoring this branch's commercial operating status, Sterling Solar is currently operating without a legally required qualifier. Any ongoing electrical installations, particularly the high-voltage grid tie at the Miller property, are now proceeding without the legally mandated supervision or valid permitting. I proofread the document 3 times. It was cold, professional, and absolutely devastating. I copied Trent Lawson's official company email address and the CC line, ensuring he would receive a direct copy of the notification. With a firm press of the Enter key, the email was sent, zipping through the digital ether to land squarely on the desks of the corporate executives. At 9:15 a.m., my laptop chimed. An email had arrived from Trent Lawson himself. I clicked it open, anticipating backpedaling or panic. Instead, I found pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Smith, I received your dramatic email. You are replaceable. The crew is already back on the roof working twice as fast without you slowing them down. We don't need your piece of paper to connect wires. Your final paycheck will be mailed on Friday. Do not contact this company again." I actually laughed out loud in the quiet of my office. I immediately hit print and watched as my laser printer hummed to life, spitting out a crisp, warm physical copy of Trent's response. He had just handed me the smoking gun on a silver platter. Not only had he acknowledged my termination, but he had explicitly documented in writing that he was willfully continuing a complex, dangerous electrical installation, despite knowing the company lacked the legal certification to do so. He didn't understand the gravity of his own words. He viewed my master certification as a mere piece of paper, a bureaucratic formality that stood in the way of his efficiency metrics. He didn't grasp that the piece of paper was the only thing standing between his company and massive county fines, lawsuits, and complete operational shutdown. I took the printed email, placed it carefully into a manila folder labeled Miller Estate Documentation, and set it neatly on the corner of my desk. The trap was fully set, the bait was taken, and the paperwork was securely filed. All I had to do now was sit back and wait for Trent to tighten the noose around his own career. He was currently standing on a $1 million roof, proudly directing an illegal project, completely oblivious to the massive regulatory storm he was enthusiastically walking into. At 1:30 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, the temperature outside had surged to a punishing 106 degrees. I was sitting on my shaded back patio enjoying a glass of iced tea and watching a pair of mourning doves pick at the seeds in our bird feeder. It was strange not being on a roof, my hands free of calluses and grease, but the peace was frequently interrupted by the frantic buzzing of my cell phone resting on the patio table. The messages were flooding in from Miguel Cortez. I had told him to keep his head down and just do his job, but the young man was clearly terrified by what he was being forced to participate in. Every 30 minutes, a new text message arrived, painting a vivid, horrifying picture of the absolute disaster unfolding on Jerry Miller's roof under Trent Lawson's unsupervised command. Text at 11:45 a.m. Mr. Smith, he's making us use the plastic flex conduit for the entire 40-foot run down the side of the house. He says the metal pipe takes too long to bend. I sighed, shaking my head as I read the message. In the harsh Arizona sun, cheap plastic conduit would become brittle and crack within a single summer. Once water penetrated the cracked casing, it would short out the massive direct current traveling from the panels, creating a spectacular fire hazard right against the stucco walls of the mansion. Text at 12:30 p.m. He told us to skip the weeby grounding lugs on the entire south-facing array. He says the rails touching each other is enough of a ground. Is that safe? My grip tightened around my glass of iced tea. The W-Weeb lugs washer, electrical equipment bonding were tiny, specialized pieces of metal that aggressively pierced the anodized coating of the aluminum rails to create a continuous, safe electrical ground path. Skipping them was an amateur, terrifying mistake. If a wire chafed against the ungrounded metal frame, the entire aluminum racking system would become electrically live. Anyone touching the roof, from a maintenance worker to a window washer, could receive a lethal shock. I quickly typed a reply to Miguel. Absolutely do not touch those rails with bare hands once the panels are plugged in. Wear your insulated lineman gloves. Let Trent do the final connections. At 2:15 p.m. my phone buzzed again, this time with a photograph attached. Miguel had snuck a picture of the main combiner box, the crucial junction where all the solar wires met before heading down to the inverter. My stomach dropped as I zoomed in on the image. Trent had clearly wired the strings of panels in parallel instead of in series, fundamentally misunderstanding the voltage requirements of the expensive, high-efficiency inverter sitting in the client's garage. "What are you frowning at?" Helen asked, stepping out onto the patio with a basket of laundry. She set it down and leaned over my shoulder to look at the bright screen. "That looks like a plate of black and red spaghetti." "It's a disaster, Helen," I explained, pointing at the tangled wires in the photo. "Trent is treating a high-voltage commercial system like he's wiring a toy train set. He's skipping the grounding, using illegal materials, and completely botching the voltage math. When they flip the breaker to turn this system on, it's either going to instantly fry a $10,000 inverter, or it's going to do absolutely nothing at all." "Why is Miguel still working up there if it's so dangerous?" she asked, her brow furrowing with genuine concern. "Miguel needs this paycheck to pay his mother's rent," I said softly, saving the photograph to my secure cloud drive. "He can't afford to quit, and Trent is pushing them to the brink of exhaustion to finish by tomorrow." "Text at 2:45 p.m., Mr. Smith. Trent just called the county office. I scheduled the final grid tie inspection for tomorrow at 3:00 p.m. He's bragging to the client that we finished 2 days ahead of schedule." I stared at the message, a slow, cold realization washing over me. Trent had actually done it. In his absolute arrogance and desperate desire to prove he could manage the project faster without me, he had forced an unsafe, completely illegal installation to completion. He had scheduled an inspection with a county office that already knew his license was entirely invalid. He had built a house of cards, and Mason Williams was already driving the bulldozer toward it. "Well," I said to Helen, locking my phone and setting it face down on the table, "it looks like tomorrow afternoon is going to be the most expensive day of Trent Lawson's entire life." By 2:45 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, the Arizona sun was baking the asphalt of Ridgeview Drive, sending shimmering waves of heat radiating off the pavement. I was sitting in the air-conditioned cab of my Silverado, parked discreetly under the thick canopy of a massive Palo Verde tree, about 200 yards down the hill from the Jerry Miller estate. I had an unobstructed view of the mansion's sprawling driveway and the massive 3-story stucco wall where the main electrical panels were located. My cell phone rested in the center console connected to the truck's Bluetooth audio system. The line was open. 15 minutes earlier, Mason Williams had called me right before he pulled his white county inspector truck onto the Miller property. He had slipped his phone into the front breast pocket of his uniform shirt, leaving the microphone perfectly positioned to broadcast the impending disaster directly into the quiet cab of my truck. "I want you to hear every single second of this, Alexander," Mason had told me, his voice barely containing his professional glee. "Consider it a front-row seat to the consequences of arrogance." Through the truck's speakers, I heard the heavy clunk of Mason's heavy-duty boots hitting the gravel driveway. I heard the sharp slam of his truck door, followed by the muffled rustle of his thick canvas clipboard against his shirt. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Mason's voice boomed over the speaker, authoritative and crisp. "I am Chief Inspector Williams with the County Electrical Board. Who is the site foreman representing Sterling Solar?" "That would be me, sir," Trent Lawson's voice replied. Even through the phone's microphone, I could hear the smug, manufactured confidence dripping from his words. "Trent Lawson, Regional Foreman. As you can see, we finished the high-voltage runs and the grid tie a full day ahead of our scheduled corporate deadline. We pride ourselves on efficiency." Efficiency, Mason repeated slowly, the word hanging heavily in the dead air. "Well, Mr. Lawson, let us take a look at your highly efficient grid tie." I leaned back in my truck seat, crossing my arms and staring intently at the tiny figures standing near the side of the mansion. I heard the metallic screech of the heavy gray inverter box being opened. I knew exactly what Mason was looking at. "Mr. The Maid 3, Lawson, could you please explain to me why you have run 40 feet of high-voltage direct current through standard, non-UV rated flexible plastic conduit on the exterior of a southern-facing stucco wall?" Mason's voice had shifted from polite to dangerously sharp. "The National Electrical Code explicitly prohibits this material for this specific application. This plastic will literally bake and crack in our climate within 12 months. It's an acceptable industry alternative to save time, Trent stammered, the smugness instantly evaporating from his tone. The metal piping takes too long to bend. We are on a strict labor budget here. The NACA does not care about your corporate labor budget, Mason snapped back. The sharp scratch of a pen against a clipboard echoed through my speakers. That is a severe, immediate code violation. Now, let's look at your combiner box. You have wired a high-efficiency series inverter in a parallel configuration. If you flip this massive breaker right now, you will instantly send the wrong voltage threshold straight into a $10,000 piece of equipment. You will fry the motherboard before the fan even spins up.
What?
No, that's how the unskilled laborers usually wire the ground mounts, Trent argued defensively, his voice rising in panic. It's all the same thing. It is absolutely not the same thing, Mason countered, his voice booming with absolute authority. A residential roof array has completely different voltage parameters than a commercial ground mount. Did you not review the manufacturer's schematic? Did you even look at the schematic? Through the windshield, I saw Trent pacing frantically in the driveway, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He was realizing in real time that he was entirely out of his depth. Furthermore, Mason continued, his tone turning completely glacial, I have just reviewed the state licensing database. I am looking for the required signature of your NABCP certified master installer to validate this permit. I see Alexander Smith was your qualifier, but Mr. Smith's license was severed from your corporate charter on Tuesday afternoon. Why are you performing high-voltage electrical connections without a legally mandated master electrician on your active payroll? Silence fell over the open line. Here was a profound, suffocating silence. Trent Lawson had just driven his career off a cliff at 100 miles an hour, and he finally saw the bottom of the canyon rushing up to meet him. I can explain that, Trent stammered over the open phone line, his voice thin and trembling. Smith was an older installer. He was slow, insubordinate, and refused to follow my direct orders. I had to terminate him to maintain the project's timeline. It was a simple administrative change. Corporate will hire another master installer by next week. We just needed to get the panels up. You terminated the sole individual who legally authorized your company to touch a single wire in this county? Mason's voice was utterly incredulous. You are not an electrician, Mr. Lawson. You are an unlicensed individual overseeing a hazardous construction site. Every single piece of equipment you have attached to this mansion is entirely unpermitted and completely illegal. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the audio feed. It was deep, booming, and laced with immediate hostility. What exactly is going on out here? Why is a county inspector yelling in my driveway? It was Jerry Miller. The wealthy owner of the 10,000-square-foot estate had apparently walked out from his expansive backyard patio, drawn by the loud voices echoing against the stucco walls. Jerry was a self-made logistics millionaire, a man who built his fortune by aggressively managing details and demanding absolute perfection from his contractors. He was currently wearing expensive golf attire, a stark contrast to his furious, reddening face. Mr. Miller, Mason said, his tone shifting back to calm professionalism. I am Chief Inspector Williams. I am deeply sorry to inform you that the solar installation currently attached to your roof is a massive, unpermitted fire hazard. A fire hazard? Jerry Miller roared. Through my binoculars, I could see the tall, imposing figure of the millionaire closing the distance between himself and Trent Lawson. I paid a $40,000 cash deposit for a premium, state-of-the-art system. What do you mean, it's a fire hazard? The foreman here, Mr. Lawson, has utilized non-compliant, illegal materials for the main conduit runs, Mason explained methodically, the scratching of his pen audible once again. He has improperly wired the inverter in a way that will destroy the equipment upon activation. Furthermore, he has admitted to skipping the crucial weeby grounding lugs on the roof rails. If a wire chafes, your entire aluminum roof rack will become electrically live. It is incredibly dangerous. Jerry Miller slowly turned to face Trent. Even from 200 yards away, I could feel the intense, overwhelming fury radiating from the homeowner. Is this true, Lawson? Did you cut corners on my roof? Miller, please. The inspector is exaggerating, Trent pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer terror. It's just minor code discrepancies. We can wrap it in electrical tape. It's perfectly safe, I assure you. Do not lie to me on my own property. Jerry exploded, his voice echoing loudly down the canyon. You fired the only man who knew what he was doing. Alexander Smith was a master craftsman. He installed the backup generator in my warehouse 5 years ago. I specifically requested his crew for this house. You fired him and let an unlicensed teenager wire my home. I didn't know you knew Smith, Trent whispered, the final nail being driven into his coffin. He was completely defeated, utterly crushed under the weight of his own profound ignorance. I am issuing an immediate stop work order on this property, Mason announced formally. I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy sticker being peeled from its backing. Mr. Lawson, I am placing this red tag directly over the main breaker. If you, or anyone from your company, attempts to touch this equipment, remove this tag, or access this roof, I will have the county sheriff arrest you for criminal trespassing and reckless endangerment. Do you understand me? Yes, Trent mumbled weakly. Get off my property, Jerry Miller demanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the massive wrought iron gates at the end of the driveway. Pack up your cheap plastic garbage, take your truck, and get out of my sight. My lawyers will be contacting Sterling Solar's corporate office before the sun goes down. You are going to pay for a real company to tear this disaster down and rebuild it from scratch. I smiled, reaching out and tapping the screen of my phone to end the call. The play was over. The curtain had fallen. I put the truck in drive, slowly pulling away from the curb and heading back down the sun-baked hill toward my peaceful, quiet home. At 4:30 p.m., the harsh Arizona sun was finally beginning its slow descent behind the jagged peaks of the western mountains, casting a warm orange glow through the windows of my home office. I was sitting at my mahogany desk, meticulously cleaning the insulated shafts of my screwdrivers with a soft cloth. It was a meditative process, a habit built over 30 years in the trades. The house was blissfully quiet. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the frantic, vibrating ring of my cell phone resting on the edge of the desk. I glanced at the caller ID. It was a Chicago area code, Sterling Solar's corporate headquarters. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the suspense, before finally reaching out and tapping the green answer button. I put the phone on speaker and set it back down on the wood surface. Alexander Smith speaking, I said calmly, returning my attention to the flathead screwdriver in my hands. Alexander, thank God you picked up. The voice on the other end was breathless, panicked, and entirely desperate. It wasn't Trent. It was Dave Sterling, the oblivious owner and CEO of the company, calling from his high-rise office 3 states away. Alexander, what in the world is happening down there in Arizona? My legal department just got a terrifying phone call from Jerry Miller's attorneys. Good afternoon, Dave, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. I assume Mr. Miller is demanding a full refund and damages for the illegal installation currently bolted to his custom roof. He's threatening to sue us into bankruptcy, Alexander, Dave yelled, the sound of papers rustling frantically in the background. He says the county inspector red-tagged the entire system. He says Trent Lawson used illegal plastic tubing and didn't ground the panels. And the inspector told him our commercial license is suspended? Alexander, please tell me this is a misunderstanding. You are our master qualifier. I was your master qualifier, Dave, I corrected him softly, setting the screwdriver down and leaning forward in my leather chair. Yesterday afternoon, your new regional foreman, Trent Lawson, fired me on the roof of the Miller estate. He explicitly told me that solar installers were just unskilled laborers and ordered me to use cheap, non-compliant materials to save time on his labor spreadsheet. When I refused to break the law, he terminated me. He fired you. Dave gasped, the air completely rushing out of his lungs. He didn't have the authority to fire the master license holder. He's just a regional manager. He doesn't know anything about the state licensing boards. He certainly knows about them now, I said. I sent a formal notification of my termination and the severing of my employer bond to your HR department yesterday morning. Trent was CC'd on the email. He actually replied, in writing, confirming my termination and stating he didn't need my piece of paper to connect the wires. I have the printed copy right here on my desk. There was a long, horrifying silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in Dave Sterling's head as he realized his hotshot new manager had just handed over written proof of gross negligence and illegal contracting. "Alexander, please," Dave begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "We can fix this. I will fire Trent right now. I will fire him while he's sitting in his truck. I'll double your salary. I'll make you the regional director. Just log back into the state portal and reattach your license to the company. If we don't have a valid license by tomorrow morning, the county is going to fine us $10,000 a day, and we'll lose all 20 of our pending commercial contracts in the state." I picked up my glass of ice water, taking a slow, deliberate sip. The condensation felt cool against my fingers. "I appreciate the offer, Dave," I said smoothly, "but my master certification is a reflection of my personal integrity and my 30 years of unblemished craftsmanship. Trent made it very clear that your company values cheap, fast, and illegal over safe, methodical, and compliant. I simply cannot risk my name or my license by attaching it to an organization that operates that way." "Alexander, you can't do this to us," Dave pleaded, his voice breaking. "We'll be ruined." "I didn't do this to you, Dave," I reminded him firmly. "Trent did. You hired a man who looked at a high-voltage power plant and saw Lego blocks. You reap what you sow. Good luck with the lawyers." I reached out and tapped the red button, ending the call. The office returned to its peaceful golden silence. The frantic panic of the corporate world was entirely sealed out. I picked up my next screwdriver, smiling softly as I continued my work. At 8:00 a.m. on Friday morning, the sky over the Arizona desert was bruised with the heavy, dark purple clouds of an impending summer monsoon. The air was thick with humidity and the unmistakable sharp scent of ozone and wet creosote bushes. I was standing in my driveway watching the first few massive raindrops splatter against the hood of my Silverado, when a familiar white county truck rumbled down the street. It pulled up to the curb, the heavy diesel engine idling smoothly. Mason Williams stepped out, a wide grin breaking across his face. He was holding a thick manila envelope shielded from the light rain by his heavy canvas jacket. He jogged up the driveway and joined me under the protective overhang of the garage. "Morning, Alexander," Mason chuckled, shaking the water from his broad shoulders. "I thought you might want a physical copy of the public records. The state electrical board had a very, very busy Thursday evening." "Come on inside, Mason," I offered, leading him into the kitchen where a fresh pot of dark roast coffee was already brewing. "Helen made some blueberry muffins. I assume you brought good news." "Good is an understatement," Mason replied, accepting a steaming ceramic mug and taking a seat at our wooden kitchen table. He opened the manila envelope and slid a stack of crisp, officially stamped county documents across the polished wood. "Trent Lawson didn't just walk into a trap, Alexander. He sprinted into it with his eyes closed." I picked up the top sheet. It was a formal notice of violation from the county electrical inspector's office, and the list of infractions was staggering. The document was an absolute bloodbath of red ink and punitive fines. "Let's break it down," Mason said, leaning forward and pointing at the itemized list with a calloused finger. "First, we have the installation of non-UV rated flexible conduit on an exterior commercial-grade residential tie. That is a massive safety violation. I fine them $500 for every 10 feet of pipe used. Next, we have the improper parallel wiring of a high-efficiency series inverter. That shows gross negligence and a fundamental lack of basic electrical comprehension." I flipped to the second page, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "And the missing weed grounding lugs?" "Oh, that was the crowning achievement," Mason laughed darkly. "Leaving a massive aluminum structure ungrounded on a residential roof is a severe life safety hazard. But the real devastating blow is on page 3. I turned the page and smiled. There, printed in bold, uncompromising black ink, was the citation for operating a commercial contracting business without a legally mandated master qualifying license. "The state board doesn't mess around with unlicensed high-voltage work," Mason explained, taking a bite of a blueberry muffin. "Sterling Solar is being fined $10,000 a day per every day that unpermitted equipment sits on Jerry Miller's roof. Furthermore, because Trent Lawson knowingly directed his crew to perform this illegal work after receiving your written resignation, the state board has personally fined him $5,000 for unlicensed contracting." "Personally?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. corporate won't cover that. Corporate is currently scrambling to survive, Mason confirmed, wiping crumbs from his mouth. I spoke with Dave Sterling this morning. He was hyperventilating. He officially fired Trent at 6 o'clock this morning. But it's too late. The damage to their reputation in the state is catastrophic. They are going to have to refund Jerry Miller's massive deposit, pay the county fines, and somehow find a new master electrician willing to clean up a red tag disaster. No respected professional in this state will touch that company now. I looked down at the documents, feeling a profound sense of vindication. Trent had valued speed over safety, arrogance over experience. He had viewed the strict codes and regulations of my trade as mere suggestions, annoying hurdles in his quest for a corporate bonus. Now, those very same regulations had completely dismantled his career. The trap had sprung flawlessly, capturing the cowboy Foreman in a net of his own making. By 2:00 p.m. that afternoon, the monsoon rain had passed, leaving behind a steaming, aggressively humid heat. I was in my home office, reviewing the final schematics for a small independent residential job I was considering taking on, when my cell phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number. It was a local area code, but not one saved in my contacts. Alexander Smith speaking, I answered, keeping my tone strictly professional. Alexander, this is Jerry Miller. The deep, commanding voice boomed through the speaker. I apologize for calling you directly, but I got your personal number from the county inspector, Mason Williams. Do you have time to come out to the estate this afternoon? Good afternoon, Mr. Miller, I replied calmly, setting my pen down on the mahogany desk. I assume this is regarding the red tag system currently sitting on your roof? It is, Jerry said, his voice dropping into a serious, businesslike timbre. Sterling Solar is done. I had my legal team absolutely eviscerate their corporate office this morning. They are returning my entire $40,000 deposit by wire transfer as we speak, and they are paying an additional penalty for the property damage caused by their incompetent foreman. Trent Lawson was escorted off my property by my private security team 3 hours ago. He looked like a ghost. I am sorry you had to go through that, Mr. Miller, I offered sincerely. A solar installation should be a seamless upgrade, not a legal battle. That's exactly why I am calling you, Alexander, Jerry continued, his tone softening slightly. Mason told me the whole story. He told me that you refused to compromise on the safety of my home, and that you allowed yourself to be fired rather than build a dangerous system. That is the exact kind of integrity I demand from the people who work for me. I appreciate that, I said, but as you know, I am no longer employed by Sterling Solar. I can't touch that roof. I don't want Sterling Solar to touch it, Jerry countered smoothly. I want you. Mason mentioned that you hold a Master NABCP certification. That means you have the legal authority to pull your own permits and run your own independent crews, correct? I paused, the sheer magnitude of what he was suggesting suddenly washing over me. This was the ultimate life twist, the hidden variable that Trent Lawson had been far too arrogant to ever see coming. When Trent fired me, he didn't just void Sterling Solar's operating license. He had unknowingly, instantly invalidated the strict non-compete clause in my corporate employment contract. I was a free agent. Yes, Mr. Miller, I confirmed, a slow smile spreading across my face. I am fully licensed to operate independently in this state. Excellent, Jerry said, the satisfaction clear in his voice. I want to hire you directly. I want you to start your own LLC this weekend. I will front the capital for the new, high-quality materials, and I will pay you a premium to personally oversee the teardown of that plastic garbage and the proper, code-compliant rebuild of my entire system. You are handing me a $1 million commercial-grade contract, I asked, wanting to ensure I was hearing him correctly. I am handing it to the only man who proved he deserves it, Jerry corrected. Sterling Solar's empire in this state is crumbling to dust today, Alexander, and you are going to pick up the pieces and build something better. Can you get a crew together by Monday? I know a young, hard-working junior installer named Miguel who just suddenly found himself out of a job this morning. I smiled, looking out the window at the bright, clearing sky. We'll be there on Monday morning, Mr. Miller, and we will do it right. 3 weeks later, the punishing afternoon heat had finally broken, giving way to a gentle, cooling evening breeze. I was standing in the immaculate garage of the Jerry Miller estate, watching Miguel Cortez secure the heavy gray metal cover over the massive grid tie inverter. We had spent the last 21 days meticulously tearing down Trent Lawson's dangerous, illegal mess and rebuilding the system exactly to code. We had used rigid, UV-rated metal conduit. We had installed every single Weebee grounding lug. We had wired the high-efficiency inverter in a perfect, flawless series. Mason Williams had come out that morning for the final inspection. He hadn't even needed his clipboard. He had simply smiled, shaken my hand, and placed the glowing green, approved sticker directly over the main breaker. "All set, Mr. Smith," Miguel said, stepping back and wiping his hands on a clean rag. He looked proud, exhausted, and incredibly happy. As the first official employee of my new company, Vanguard Solar LLC, he was making a fair living wage and learning the trade the right way. "Flip the switch, Miguel," I told him, nodding toward the heavy disconnect lever. Miguel reached out and pulled the lever down with a solid, satisfying clunk. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the internal cooling fans of the massive inverter hummed to life, a quiet, steady rhythm that signaled the safe, efficient transfer of high-voltage direct current into clean, usable household power. The green indicator lights blinked on in perfect sequence. The system was alive, and it was absolutely flawless. Later that evening, I sat on the quiet, shaded back porch of my own home. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the Arizona sky in brilliant strokes of magenta and deep orange. Helen sat beside me in a comfortable wicker chair, sipping a glass of iced tea. The air was peaceful, the stress of the past month entirely evaporated. I looked out over the quiet neighborhood, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air, and I realized there was a profound lesson in everything that had transpired.